The galaxy had a joke about humans. It went like this: if you need someone to carry your grain, hire a human. If you need someone to fight your war, hire anyone else. Nobody said it to be mean. It was just the truth as the galaxy understood it. Humans were small, soft, and slow. Their ships were 40 years behind standard galactic technology. Their weapons could not scratch a military-grade hull. They had no standing army, no territory anyone wanted, no seat on the War Council. What they had were trade routes, open hands, and a habit of showing up in dangerous places with food and good intentions. The Vorath called them Salavi, the gentle ones. The Keth called them Ganari, the unarmed. The Solhari had no word for them at all. That silence said everything. In 11 years as a Vorath diplomatic observer, Ambassador Zethkal had met exactly 4 humans. All 4 were traitors. All 4 offered him food within the first 5 minutes. 3 of them asked about his family, which he found both invasive and oddly warm. The 4th taught him a card game called poker, which Zethkal had won exactly once. He suspected he had been allowed to win. He did not think about humans very often. Nobody did. The Reach had been an argument for 300 years. 7 star systems, 4 habitable worlds, asteroid fields rich enough in rare metals to fund a century of war, which was more or less what both sides were planning. The Keth Empire said the Reach belonged to them by right of early exploration. The Solhari Federation said it belonged to them by right of settlement. Neither side was entirely wrong, which made the argument impossible to end. For 3 centuries, it had been a cold dispute, sharp words at council meetings, trade restrictions, the occasional border skirmish that both sides pretended had not happened. For the past 6 months, it had been something much warmer. Ambassador Zethkal was aboard the Galactic Council's observation shuttle when the countdown to war stopped being measured in days and started being measured in hours. He sat in the forward cabin and watched fleet positions shift on the display screen and tried to feel useful. The Council had sent him and 7 other observers to watch, record, and stay well out of the way. He was good at watching. He had made a career of it. Then the alert came in. A human vessel had entered the Reach. He pulled up the file: ISV Pale Horse, Earth Registry Year 2287, Class Light Freighter, length 240 meters, crew 31, FTL drive, standard civilian grade, medium range, armament none listed, cargo manifest, medical supplies, grain stock, textile machinery, and 2,200 units of something the form described as personal comfort items. He ran a sensor cross-check on the last line: blankets. 2,200 units of blankets. The Keth fleet was sitting on the eastern edge of the Reach. 3 dreadnoughts, 1 carrier group, 2 wings of screening cruisers, engines at full warm. The Solhari fleet was massing fast on the western side. Diplomatic talks had collapsed 4 days ago when the Solhari delegation walked out, and the Keth delegation, reportedly, threw a chair. The first shots were expected within 72 hours. And in the center of it all, moving at a careful and thoroughly unhurried speed, 1 human cargo ship on its way to deliver blankets to a colony. Fleet Commander Dracos stood at the head of the observation deck and looked at the display for a long time without speaking. He was Senior Keth, gray-scaled, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who had lived long enough that his silences meant more than other men's sentences. He had run 3 campaigns. He had ended 2 border wars. He was not a man who wasted words. "Signal them," he said. "Tell them to leave." "We've hailed them twice already, sir," said the communications officer. "They acknowledge the signal. They say they have a delivery contract." Dracos went still. "A delivery contract. For a colony on Reach 4, sir. The manifest lists medical supplies and I can read a manifest." He turned to Zethkal. His expression was the kind a man uses when he wants help and doesn't like admitting it. "You know these people." "I have met 4 of them," Zethkal said. "That is 4 more than anyone else on this shuttle. Go talk to them. Get them out of there before someone kills them by accident." The docking took 20 minutes. The Pale Horse ran an older collar model, not incompatible with the Council shuttle, just slow, like a handshake between people who had learned the gesture from different teachers. Zethkal waited in the airlock and looked through the small viewport at the human ship's hull. It was plain. Gray plating, slightly scuffed, the kind of wear that came from years of use rather than neglect. Running lights blinked on a standard cycle, steady, unhurried. Near the airlock hatch, someone had painted a horse in faded white, running, mane loose, legs stretched full. Beneath it, in small, clean block letters, is Pale Horse, Earth Registry, 2287. He had seen hundreds of ships like this in the trade lanes. Working vessels, honest ships, not beautiful, not impressive. Built to carry things from one place to another and come home again. The airlock opened. The smell hit him first. Coffee. That particular sharp, warm smell that humans carried everywhere, that seemed to come out of the walls of any ship they had lived on long enough. Beneath it, the deep metal smell of an old hull, and something else, something he couldn't name, like clean cloth and engine oil, and a home someone had decided to keep. The corridor was immaculate. That stopped him for a moment. Not clean the way a ship was clean when its maintenance cycle ran on time. Clean the way a room was clean when the person living in it had chosen, on their own, to make it that way. The floor was smooth. The wall panels sat flush and straight. No grime in the corners. No loose cabling taped back with temporary fixes. Everything was in its place because someone had put it there. A woman was waiting at the end of the corridor, medium height. Dark hair pulled back tight, brown skin, brown eyes. She wore a dark uniform with no rank insignia that Zethkal could read, which could mean she was a civilian captain, or could mean something else entirely, and he found he could not tell which. Her hands were loose at her sides. She looked at him the way a person looks at something they have already thought through. "Ambassador Zethkal," she said. Her Vorith had no accent, none at all. Not the careful correct pronunciation of someone who had studied the language from recordings. Not the slight flattening that most non-Vorith speakers never quite fixed. She spoke it like someone who had grown up with it. "I'm Captain Vasquez," she said. "Come in." She took him to the wardroom. 6 chairs around a plain table. A shelf along one wall holding small objects. A framed photograph, a worn book, a small clay figure of something he didn't recognize. The coffee maker in the corner was running. She poured him a cup without asking. He had met enough humans now to understand this was hospitality, not pressure. "Your ship is in a war zone," he said. "I know." She sat across from him and wrapped her hands around her own cup. "We have a delivery contract. Your contract is not worth your lives." He had used that line before, on difficult governors and stubborn local commanders and people who had built their pride into their refusal to move. It was a simple line. It worked because it was true, and because most people, when the truth sat in front of them, found it hard to argue with. She looked at him over the rim of her cup. Nothing moved in her face. "Ambassador," she said, "how long have you been doing this job?" 11 years. "In 11 years, how many wars have you stopped?" The question sat between them. He had answers he could give. Technical answers, process answers. He had delayed 3 conflicts. He had mediated 2 trade disputes that might have become something worse. He had done his job carefully and completely and with skill. "None," he said, because she was asking for the honest number and they both knew what it was. She nodded once, not unkindly. "The war is happening whether we're here or not. We have people on Reach 4 who need what's in our cargo hold. Medical supplies don't wait for politics." She stood. "Our delivery doesn't either." He studied her face. He had learned to read people across 11 years of this work. Had learned the tight lines of someone hiding fear, the careful eyes of someone managing a secret, the small delays in speech that meant a person was choosing their words instead of just saying them. Vasquez had none of that. She was not performing calm. She simply was calm the way a mountain is calm. Not because nothing could touch it, because it had already decided what it was. "Captain," he said, "I am trying to help you." "I know you are," she said, and she sounded like she meant it. "You should get back to your shuttle, Ambassador. Today is a bad day to be curious." She walked him to the airlock. She waited while the collar disengaged. She gave him a small nod as the airlock sealed. He went back to the shuttle. He reported to Dracus. The human ship had refused to move, had a delivery contract, had a captain who spoke Vorith without an accent, and looked at a coming war the way most people looked at bad weather. Dracus stared at the display for a long time. The pale horse beacon sat in the center of the Reach, steady and patient. "What does it take," he said slowly, "to make a human leave?" Nobody on the bridge had an answer. Zethkal did not answer either. He was thinking about the corridor, the deliberate cleanliness of it, the coffee smell baked into the walls of a ship that was clearly old but clearly loved. He was thinking about a woman who had learned Vorith well enough to have no accent and had never thought to mention it. He was thinking about the way she had said, "Today is a bad day to be curious." Not like a threat, not like a warning about the fleets. Like she was holding a door open for him and suggesting gently that he walk through it before it closed. He pushed the thoughts aside. She was a cargo captain, 31 crew, blankets and medical supplies. He had overthought stranger things and been wrong before. The Keth moved 14 hours early. Zethkal was asleep when the alarm went off. He reached the observation deck, still pulling on his jacket, and the display was already burning with fleet signatures. The Keth had jumped in without warning. 3 dreadnoughts, a carrier, screening wings moving fast into position. The Solhari were responding on the western edge, forming up. In the center of the Reach, the pale horse, still moving at that same quiet speed, like a man walking to work while the city burns around him. "They have to run," someone said. "Signal them," Dracus said. His voice had gone flat. The kind of flat that meant he was working hard to keep it there. Tell them to run. No response, sir. On the display, the Keth flagship rotated. The Eternal Dominion, 3 kilometers of warship, the pride of the Keth Third Fleet, enough firepower in her bow alone to crack a station shield, turned its nose toward the center of the reach, toward the Pale Horse. Warning shot, Dracus said. Across the bow, they want the lane. The Eternal Dominion fired not across the bow, center mass, full power. A disruptor strike meant for military hulls, the kind used to open fortified stations to end warships, to turn anything smaller and weaker into a field of cooling metal. The beam hit the Pale Horse dead center. Every person on the observation deck stopped breathing. The Pale Horse sat there, intact, running lights blinking, same speed, same course, unchanged, the way a stone is unchanged when a river runs over it. The sensor officer made a sound that was not a word. Zethkal checked the readings himself. He checked them twice. He checked the calibration 3 times because the calibration had to be wrong. The readings said the Pale Horse had been hit by a full power strike from a Keth dreadnought. The readings also said the Pale Horse was completely undamaged. These 2 things could not both be true. They were both true. The bridge was perfectly silent. On the display, the Pale Horse began to turn, not running, not flinching, not drifting off course from damage. Turning deliberately, the way something large turns when it has finished being patient with a problem and decided to face it directly. Slow, purposeful, final. Lines appeared in the hull. Zethkal saw them on the visual feed and felt something cold move through him. Clean, precise lines in places that had no business being in the hull of a light freighter. Not cargo hatches. Not maintenance panels. Not anything on any civilian vessel he had ever seen. Weapons ports. He started counting, lost count, they opened. All of them, all at once. And the things inside them, the things the sensor was looking at and could not categorize, could not fit into any index because nothing like them existed in the index, began to power up with a low steady light that the display had no color code for. The Pale Horse was not a cargo ship. He stood there and understood, fully and completely and without any room for doubt, that the Pale Horse had never been a cargo ship, not for a single day of its life. He thought about the corridor, the smell of it, the way someone had chosen to keep that ship clean every day, because it was worth keeping. He thought about 7 languages and accent-free Vorith, and a woman who had looked at a coming war with the calm of someone who already knew how the day would end. He thought about today is a bad day to be curious, she had been warning him. Not about the Keth, not about the Solhari, about her, about what was coming next. The communications array crackled open on every frequency simultaneously. Every ship in the reach, every shuttle, every listener within range. Captain Vasquez's voice came through clearly. Her Vorith was still accent-free. "This is the ISV Pale Horse," she said. "Earth Vessel Registry 2287. Captain Mira Vasquez commanding." She paused. "You hit my ship." Another pause shorter. "I'd like to talk about that." The reach went very quiet. Both fleets sat still. Zethkal stood on the observation deck and looked at the display and understood, in the particular way, that a person understands something that changes every assumption they have ever made, that the galaxy had been telling the wrong joke about humans for a very long time. The silence lasted 11 seconds. Zethkal counted them. He had nothing else to do. Both fleets were sitting still. The observation deck was sitting still. Even the display seemed to have gone quiet, as though the machines themselves were waiting to find out what kind of situation this was. Then Admiral Grethen, commanding the Eternal Dominion, opened a channel. "Human vessel," he said, in Keth. "Because the Keth did not modify their language for other species, you are in a restricted military lane. Power down and prepare to be boarded or you will be destroyed." Vasquez answered in Keth, accent-free Keth. "Admiral," she said, "I've been in your restricted military lane for 16 hours. You had my transponder signal the whole time. You chose to fire instead of talk. I'm not interested in being boarded. I am interested in the conversation I mentioned." A longer silence. Zethkal watched Dracos. The fleet commander had not moved. He was standing at the display with his hands behind his back, and the particular stillness of a man who has just realized that the situation he was managing has become a different situation entirely, and is now working out the shape of the new one. "What are those weapons?" Dracus said quietly. "I don't know," said the sensor officer. "Identify them." "I'm trying, sir. They don't match anything in the index. They don't match anything in the military index, or the civilian index, or any index, sir. I've run it 4 times. The energy signature is consistent with directed kinetic delivery, but the power output is..." He stopped. "Is what?" "Is more than this ship should be able to generate, sir. By a significant margin." Dracus looked at the display. At the small gray ship with its open weapons ports and its steady running lights and its coffee maker that was probably still on. How significant, he said. The sensor officer said the number. Dracus went very still. On the Eternal Dominion, Admiral Grethen was having a similar conversation with his own sensor team. He was not a man who frightened easily. He had commanded the Keth Third Fleet for 9 years. He had fought 2 real wars and a dozen border conflicts. He had stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion while a Solhari cruiser tried to ram his ship, and he had not moved. He was moving now. Not quickly. Just to the sensor console, to look at the numbers himself. Because the numbers his officer had just read to him were numbers that could not be correct. He looked at them. He looked at his officer. "Run it again," he said. "I've run it 6 times, Admiral." He looked at the numbers again, the output, the signature. The structural readings coming off a ship that his weapons had just hit with everything the Eternal Dominion had. A shot that would have broken a cruiser in half and sent a destroyer into atoms. And which showed no damage. No trace of damage, not even thermal scarring on the hull plating. He pulled up the entry for the ISV Pale Horse in the Galactic Ship Registry. Light freighter, 240 meters, civilian grade, crew of 31. He looked at what was on the display. "That is not a light freighter," he said. His communications officer turned from his station. "Admiral, the human captain is still on the open channel. She's asking if you want to speak." Grethen straightened. "Patch her through," he said. Vasquez's voice was easy. Not relax the way someone is relaxed when nothing is happening. Relax the way someone is relaxed when they have been through the hard part already. And what remains is just talking. "Admiral," she said, "here's what I'd like. I'd like you and the Solhari fleet commander to both hold your current positions for 48 hours, while the Galactic Council mediators attempt one more round of talks. I'd like my ship to continue to reach for and complete our delivery. And I'd like an acknowledgement from your fleet that the Pale Horse will not be fired upon again." A pause. "In exchange, nothing happens today that you don't want to happen." Grethen's jaw tightened. "You are one ship. You are threatening the Keth Third Fleet." "I'm not threatening anyone," she said. "I'm describing a situation. There's a difference. Your weapons are impressive," he said, because they were, and he had spent a career being honest about what was in front of him. "But you are still one ship against my fleet. The math does not favor you." "Admiral," Vasquez said, and something in her voice shifted, just slightly, just enough that Zethkal, listening on the observation deck, felt the hair on the back of his neck move. "I'd really encourage you not to think of this as a math problem." Silence. Then, "Why?" "Because math problems have solutions," she said, "and I'd rather this conversation didn't need one." Grethen fired, not a warning shot this time, a full broadside. Every forward battery on the Eternal Dominion, all at once, everything the ship had in its front arc. 3 other ships in the Keth fleet joined the volley, targeting the Pale Horse from different angles. It was the kind of firepower that ended battles, that broke fleets, that turned strong military ships into nothing. The Pale Horse sat in the middle of it. It sat there the way an island sits in a storm. The weapon's fire hit and scattered, and the Pale Horse was still there, weapons ports still open, running lights still blinking, and Zethkal's sensor officer said very quietly that the energy readings on the human ship had not changed, had not spiked, had not even flickered. It had not used its shields to absorb that. It had done something else, something the sensors could not name. "What is that?" said someone on the observation deck. Nobody answered. On the display, the Pale Horse's weapon systems shifted, just slightly. The targeting are arrays. Because they were targeting arrays, the sensor officer confirmed it with the kind of voice a person uses when they are saying something they would prefer not to say. Rotated. A small adjustment. The kind of adjustment a marksman makes when they stop looking at the crowd and pick one face. They were pointing at the Eternal Dominion. Only the Eternal Dominion. The open channel crackled. "Admiral," Vasquez said. "Last chance." Zethkal was watching the secondary display when he saw it. He almost missed it. The main display was full of the standoff, the 2 fleets, the single human ship, the targeting readings that made no sense. It was the secondary display, running a background routine that tracked all registered vessels in the sector, that caught his eye. Transponder signals. There were 18 human vessels currently registered in the Reach and surrounding systems. Standard cargo ships. He had checked them all when he first came on shift, as part of his situation survey. 18 ships, routine signals, scattered across the sector on their various trade routes. As he watched, one of them went dark. The transponder signal simply stopped. Not a malfunction indicator, not a distress code, just off. One moment broadcasting, the next, nothing. He stared at the blank space on the display where the signal had been. Another one went dark, then another. He watched, he counted. One by one, The human cargo ships in the surrounding sector were turning off their transponders. Not in a panic, not in response to any signal he could see. In sequence, unhurried, like lights being switched off in a house at the end of the night. 4 dark, 5, 6. Commander, he said. Dracus did not look away from the main display. Commander. Zethkal's voice came out different from how he intended it. Not loud, very steady. You need to look at the secondary screen. Dracus looked. He watched the signals go dark. 7, 8, 9. What is this, he said. I don't know, Zethkal said. But I think. He stopped. Say it. I think they're not cargo ships either. Dracus turned to look at him, not with anger. With the particular expression of a man who has just heard a thing he has known, on some level, for several minutes, spoken out loud for the first time. 11, 12, 13. Get me a reading on the last known positions of those vessels, Dracus said. His voice was completely controlled. Now, all of them. The sensor officer worked. The positions appeared on the display, one by one, as the transponders continued to go dark. Zethakal looked at the pattern. Every dark ship was in the reach, or on the edge of it, or in the 3 systems immediately adjacent. They were not scattered randomly across trade routes. They were placed, 14, 15, 16. Placed the way pieces are placed on a game board by someone who has been thinking about the endgame since before the game began. They're surrounding us, said the sensor officer very quietly. Not just the Keth fleet, both fleets. 17. The last transponder, a ship called the ISV Prairie Wind, registered to a trading company out of a human station called Port Morrow, went dark. 18 ships, positions forming a rough perimeter around the entire contested zone, including both the Keth and Solhari fleet positions. All dark, all silent, all. If the sensor readings on the Pale Horse were any guide, carrying weapons that did not appear in any index and shielding, that did not respond to a full military broadside. The main display crackled. Vasquez's voice. Admiral Grethen, she said. Still easy, still unhurried. Commander Veth of the Solhari fleet, I know you've been listening. Ambassador Zethkal, I know you're on the council shuttle. A brief pause. You've probably noticed that some of our friends have arrived. Zethkal found that he was holding the edge of the console. What I'd like, she said, is exactly the same thing I asked for before. 48 hours. A council mediation window. And a promise that my ship gets to finish its delivery. She paused. The terms haven't changed. They won't change. And I think everyone in this sector now has enough information to make a good decision. Silence on the bridge. Outside in the reach, 18 human ships sat dark and still, carrying whatever they were carrying, being whatever they actually were. Dracus looked at the display for a long time. Then he looked at Zethkal. 11 years, he said. You met 4 of them. Yes, Zethkal said. Did any of them give you any indication? No, Zethkal said. Dracus turned back to the display. No, he said, almost to himself, like he was confirming something he had suspected for several minutes. No, I don't suppose they would. He straightened. He looked at the communications officer. Open a channel to Captain Vasquez, he said. Galactic Council frequency. The officer opened it. Dracus stood with his hands behind his back and his chin up. The way he stood when he was doing something that cost him something, and he said, Captain Vasquez, this is Fleet Commander Dracus, Galactic Council observation mission. We accept the 48-hour mediation window. A pause from Vasquez. Thank you, Commander. I have a question, Dracus said. Go ahead. How long have you been planning this? The channel was quiet for a moment. When Vasquez answered, her voice was the same easy thing it had always been. No pride in it, no satisfaction. Just the voice of someone answering a direct question with a direct answer. A while, she said. How long is a while? Commander, she said, and there might have been, just barely, the edge of a smile somewhere in it. That's a question for the meeting. The channel closed. Zethkal stood on the observation deck and looked at the display, and thought about 11 years of diplomatic work and 4 humans and a card game he had been allowed to win. And he understood that he had been operating, for his entire career, inside a situation he had completely failed to see. He thought about the clean corridor. He thought about the coffee. He thought about, today's a bad day to be curious. He had taken the warning. He had gone back to his shuttle. He had done the safe thing. It had not made him any less inside the situation. It had just meant he would find out about it a little later than everyone else. The Pale Horse's weapons ports were still open. Its running lights were still blinking. Somewhere in its wardroom, the coffee maker was probably still running, patient and ordinary, like everything else about that ship had appeared to be. 18 dark ships waited in silence around the edges of the reach. Zethkal thought about the word, a while, and what it might mean, and decided he was not sure he was ready to know. He decided he was going to find out anyway. The 48 hours were very quiet. The Keth fleet held its position. The Solhari fleet held its position. The 18 dark ships held theirs, sitting silent at the edges of the reach. No transponders, no active weapon signatures, just mass readings on the sensor display that the officers kept going back to check, as if hoping the numbers had changed. They had not changed. Zethkal did not sleep much. He spent the hours reviewing everything he knew about human ships and human trade patterns and human diplomatic history, which he had never had much reason to study in depth before, because nobody had much reason to study it. He pulled records from the Council database, fleet registrations, trade manifests, colonial surveys. He read them the way he had never read them before, not looking at what they said, but looking for what they didn't say. The more he looked, the less comfortable he became. The Pale Horse completed its delivery to Reach 4 during the second night. The colony received the medical supplies and the grain and 1,200 blankets. The colony's administrator, a young man named Dr. Abara, who had been born on Reach 4 and had never left it, later said that when the Pale Horse landed, it looked like any other supply run. The crew was professional and friendly, and 2 of them had helped carry boxes. One of them had brought the colony's children a small bag of candy. Nobody had mentioned the weapons ports. The Pale Horse lifted off and returned to its position in the Reach. The weapons ports were closed now. The ship looked again like a battered gray freighter that had seen a lot of trade lanes in a lot of years. On the morning of the second day, the council mediation session began. It went nowhere. The Keth and Solhari delegates had been doing this for 3 centuries, and they were very good at it. They said the same things they had always said, in the same order, with the same conviction, and after 6 hours the session adjourned with nothing resolved except the location of the next session. The 48 hours ended. Nothing happened. Both fleets held their positions. Neither side moved. Zethkal went to Drakus and pointed out, carefully, that the mediation window had closed and the tactical situation had not changed. Drakus looked at him. I'm aware. The Keth fleet is. I'm aware of what the Keth fleet is, Ambassador. I'm also aware of what is sitting around the perimeter of this sector. He turned back to the display. Contact Captain Vasquez. Ask her what she recommends. It was, Zethkal understood, an extraordinary thing for Drakus to say. He was not a man who asked civilian cargo captains for military recommendations. He was a man who gave orders and expected them to be followed. The fact that he was asking meant that the 48 hours had done something to his understanding of the situation. Zethkal opened the channel to the Pale Horse. Vasquez recommended another 72 hours. She did not ask for anything in return. No new terms, no conditions. Just give the mediators more time. Let the talks continue. Let people think. The Keth fleet agreed. The Solhari fleet agreed. Neither of them, in Zethkal's assessment, agreed because they wanted to. They agreed because the alternative was a confrontation with 18 ships of unknown capability, arranged in a perimeter around their entire operational area, and nobody had been able to tell either fleet commander what those ships were capable of, which meant neither fleet commander could calculate the outcome of a fight. You could not plan a battle when you could not calculate the outcome. The 72 hours began. On the second day, Zethkal requested permission to come aboard the Pale Horse again. Vasquez said yes. She met him at the airlock the same way she had the first time, same uniform, same expression. The coffee maker was running. He sat in the wardroom and she poured him a cup and he said, I want to understand what I'm looking at. That's a big question, she said. I know. What part of it do you want to start with? He thought about it. The weapons, he said, in your hull. They're not in any index I have access to. Our sensor officer has run the signature 6 times. Your ship absorbed a full broadside from the Keth flagship and registered no damage. What are you carrying? She looked at her cup. A small pause, the first real pause he had seen from her. Not a hesitation exactly. The pause of someone deciding how much of a long answer to give. What we're carrying, she said, is not new. We've had it for a while. We just haven't shown it. Why? Because showing it changes things, she said. And once things change, they don't change back. He waited. The first 3 species to make contact with the Galactic Council, she said. The Orathi, the Selen, the Drev. He knew the names. Every council diplomat did. Historical entries now. Species that had been contacted in the early expansion period, 2 centuries ago. The Orathi had been absorbed into the Keth Empire within 30 years of contact. The Selen had been dismantled by the Solhari Federation over a territorial dispute. The Drev had simply been, Zethkal's word for it was, managed. Their leadership had been replaced, their resources taken, their culture surviving in isolated pockets under Vorath administration. We looked at them, Vasquez said, and we understood the situation. So you hid. We prepared, she said. There was a difference in those 2 words. Zethkal understood, and it was not a small one. For how long? He said. She looked at him. The same steady look she had given him the first time. The one he still couldn't read all the way to the bottom of. That, she said, is a question for the meeting. The 72 hours ended with a development nobody had expected. A Solhari cruiser, the Bright Advance T, moved out of formation without orders. The Solhari fleet commander's logs later showed that the cruiser's captain, a young officer named Sevlon, had made a unilateral decision. He wanted to test the perimeter. He wanted to know if the human ships would actually fire, or whether it was all positioning. He took his cruiser to within weapons range of the human ship, designated on the sensor display as Contact 7, a vessel that had been registered until 72 hours ago as the ISV Prairie Wind, a dry goods hauler out of Port Morrow. Contact 7 did not power up its weapons, it did not fire, it did not move, it did not open communications, it simply turned on its exterior lights, all of them. The Prairie Wind, or whatever the Prairie Wind actually was, lit up like a sun. Every external light on the hull activated simultaneously, a white blaze that the sensor officer on the observation deck described as equivalent to a small star going active at close range. Not a weapon signature, not a shield, just light, just, I see you, I have always seen you. Move back. The Bright Advance moved back. Captain Sevlon, in his later report, said the light had not done anything to his ship, had not damaged his hull, had not interfered with his systems. It had just been so overwhelming, so immediate, so clearly intentional, that he had understood in his bones that he was not testing anything. He had just been told something. He had moved back. On the third day of the second window, the talks finally moved. Zethkal was not sure what had shifted. People were tired, perhaps. The weight of the ships on the perimeter pressed down differently after 6 days than it had after 2. Or perhaps, he thought this later, thinking back on it, the presence of the human vessels had done something else, had made both sides feel equally threatened, equally enclosed, equally subject to a force outside their control. And when two sides feel the same pressure, sometimes they stop pushing against each other and start looking for the door together. The Keth and Solhari delegates proposed a joint resource extraction arrangement for the Reach, a revenue split, not ideal for either side, not what either side had wanted. Both sides signed it. Zethkal sat in the mediation room when the signatures went down, and he thought about what that meant. 3 centuries of argument, 2 fleets on the edge of a war, 6 days of watching 18 dark ships sit at the perimeter of a sector like a ring around a drain, and now signatures. He thought about Vasquez's word. Prepared, he turned it over in his head. He had been thinking about it since she said it, feeling the shape of it, the weight that was in it. Prepared meant time. Prepared meant intention. Prepared meant someone had looked at the galaxy, understood it, and made a plan that accounted for what the galaxy actually was, rather than what you might hope it to be. He went back to the Pale Horse. She was in the wardroom again. The talk succeeded, he said. I heard, she said. The Keth and Solhari have signed. Good. He sat down. She poured the cup. He held it and did not drink it. When the fleets leave, he said, what do your ships do? Go back to work, she said. Back to being cargo ships. She looked at him. We are cargo ships, she said. We deliver things, we run trade routes, we keep contracts. She paused. We just also do some other things. I want to know what other things. She considered him for a moment, the way she had the first time, filing something. Ambassador, she said, do you want to come to the meeting? He looked up. What meeting? The one on Earth, she said, that the council has been invited to. Formally in writing through proper diplomatic channels. The invitation was sent this morning. He stared at her. The council hasn't. I haven't seen. It was sent this morning, she said. Your office will have it by now. A small pause. We've been trying to have this meeting for a long time. It kept getting delayed. Other priorities. She looked out the small porthole at the dark of the Reach. We thought this might help move it up the schedule. He looked at her. He looked at the Reach outside the porthole, where 18 ships that were not cargo ships sat in their perimeter in the dark. He thought about the word, help. When you say you've been trying to have this meeting, he said slowly, how long have you been trying? She picked up her cup. That, she said, is actually part of the meeting agenda. The Keth fleet left the Reach on the 4th day. The Solhari fleet left on the 5th. The mediation observers packed up and prepared to return to council headquarters. Zethkal stood on the observation deck as the shuttle prepared to undock from the Pale Horse. The 18 ships were still there. They had not moved. They had not turned their transponders back on. Draca stood next to him and looked at the display and said very quietly, 11 years. And you met 4 of them. Yes, and in all that time did any of them ever seem? He stopped looking for the word. No, Zethkal said. They always seemed exactly like what they appeared to be. Dracus was quiet for a long time. That, he said, might be the most alarming thing I have ever heard. The shuttle undocked. The pale horse fell away behind them, growing smaller on the rear display until it was just a gray shape against the stars. Running lights blinking, steady, patient, ordinary. The council invitation to Earth had arrived, as Vasquez had said it would. It was formal and correct and in perfect galactic diplomatic language. It was signed by someone with the title Secretary General of the United Earth Government. Below that, a secondary signature. The representative of something called the Earth Strategic Development Office, a body that Zethkal ran a database search on and could find no prior mention of anywhere in the galactic record. The signature was Vasquez M. Captain, ISV Palehorse, and apparently something else. He sat with the invitation in his hands and looked out at the stars and thought about 3 extinct species and a card game, an accent-free Vorith and 18 ships that had been sitting in plain sight on trade routes for who knew how long, and he understood that the galaxy was about to have a meeting it was not entirely ready for. He was going, though. Whatever it cost him to understand, he was going to find out. The Galactic Council went into emergency session 12 hours after the Pale Horse incident ended. They called it the Pale Horse Incident because they had to call it something. The formal entry in the council record read, Contested Zone Standoff, the Reach, involving Earth vessel ISV Pale Horse and associated vessels, resolved without casualty, which was accurate, which also described a thunderstorm as some rain. The council chamber held 47 seats. Humanity had 3 of them, junior seats, non-voting on military matters, with restricted accesses to strategic intelligence. The 3 human delegates sat in their usual place near the back of the curved chamber. They looked, as always, pleasant and slightly out of their depth. Councillor Methril, the Vorith intelligence chief, looked at them throughout the emergency session and tried to square what he was seeing with what his analysts had sent him in the last 6 hours. He could not. The intelligence review had started while the session was being called. Methril had 6 analysts on it within an hour of the Reach standoff ending, pulling everything the council had on human ships, human trade patterns, human colonial activity, anything, everything. The full body of data going back to first contact. The first report came in 2 hours into the session. Mass discrepancies. Not on every human ship, just on the ones that had been in the Reach. When Methril's team pulled the mass readings from the past year of routine sensor sweeps, the kind of sweeps that happened automatically when ships passed through monitored transit lanes, and compared them against the registered cargo weights, the numbers didn't line up. Not by a little, by a lot. The ISV Prairie Wind, for example, had passed through the Vorith Transit Hub at Gamma Station 7 times in the past year. Each time, the automated sensor sweep had logged its mass at approximately twice what its cargo manifest declared. The discrepancy had been flagged each time, automatically, and each time a human trade representative had filed a correction within 48 hours, citing sensor calibration errors or variance in fuel load calculations. The corrections had been accepted, the flags had been cleared. 7 times. Methril looked at that. He looked at every human ship that had passed through every monitored transit lane in the past 12 months. He looked at the number of discrepancy flags filed. He looked at the number of corrections accepted. He sat for a moment with his hands flat on his desk. Then he said, "Pull the records from the past 10 years. The discrepancies went back 10 years. Probably further." His team was still working backward through the archive. Every flag, every correction. Filed within 48 hours, accepted. Every time. The second report came in 4 hours into the session. Energy signatures. This one took longer to find because someone had to think to look for it. One of Methral's junior analysts, a young Vorith named Ethra, who had a habit of checking things that were not strictly part of her assignment, had pulled the passive radiation data from the transit lanes. The kind of data that sensors collected constantly, and that nobody ever really looked at because it was background noise. Except it was not background noise. Human ships put out a very specific secondary radiation signature when they entered transit. All ships did. It was a byproduct of the FTL drive. The signature varied by drive type, and the variance was how you identified what kind of drive a ship was running. The signature from human civilian ships was exactly what a civilian-grade medium-range FTL drive produced, except sometimes for a period of about 3 seconds immediately after entry, before the standard signature stabilized, there was a different signature underneath it, shorter, cleaner, much higher energy output. You could miss it easily. It lasted 3 seconds and was overlaid almost immediately by the civilian signature. The transit sensors were not calibrated to look for it. It appeared in the background data as a minor anomaly. Ethra had found it on 6 ships, then 20. Then, as she went back through the archive, on every human ship in the record, every single one. She brought it to Methril. He looked at it. "What drive produces this signature?" he said. She showed him the output calculations. He looked at them. He ran them himself because he wanted to be certain. "This is not a civilian drive," he said. "No, sir. This is not a military drive either." "No, sir. The output is." She paused. "Sir, the output is approximately 40 times what our fastest military drive produces." He put the calculations down. He picked them up again. 40 times, he said. Yes, he sat with that for a moment. 40 times. The fastest ship in the Keth military took 6 days to cross the core systems. 40 times that speed, 2 hours. "How long has this signature been appearing in the transit data?" he said. She looked at her screen. "How far back do you want me to go, sir?" "All the way back," he said. "First contact." She went back. First contact with humanity had been 211 years ago. A human probe had entered Vorith space, followed shortly by a crewed diplomatic vessel. The contact had been uneventful, cordial. The humans had been curious and polite and slightly puzzling in the way that new species were sometimes puzzling. They had asked questions about the council structure, about member species, about galactic history. They had also asked about the Orathi, about the Selen, about the Drev. That was in the first contact transcript. Methril read it himself when it was pulled for him. The human diplomatic delegation had, in their very first meeting with a Vorith council representative, asked specifically about the 3 species who had been absorbed, dismantled, or managed in the previous century. The Vorith representative had told them what had happened. Straightforwardly. He had not hidden it. It was old history. The humans had said, "Thank you. That is very useful to know." They had gone home, and they had not come back to the council for 11 years. When they came back, they had a full diplomatic delegation, 3 junior seat applications, and a trade proposal. They had been, Methril looked at the record, unfailingly helpful, cooperative, and of limited strategic importance for the entire 200 years since. He went back to the secondary drive signature in the transit data. It appeared in the record 11 years after first contact, which meant that in those 11 years, whatever the humans had been doing, they had developed a drive that outperformed anything in the galaxy by 40 times. And then they had come back and flown their ships through monitored transit lanes for 2 centuries using it. And nobody had found it, because nobody had looked, because nobody had thought to look, because the humans were the Salavi, the gentle ones, the unarmed, the species that brought food to difficult meetings and asked about your family, and taught you card games, and lost them politely. Methril sat in his office while the emergency session ran upstairs, and he looked at 200 years of data, and he understood, finally, what he was looking at. He was looking at the longest, most patient, most complete piece of strategic deception in the history of the galaxy, and it had worked. The third report took all day. It was the hardest one to write because it was the one that required his team to go location by location through every human installation in the galaxy. Every trading post, every way station, every colonial outpost, every port of call listed in human commercial records, and compare the declared infrastructure against what the passive sensor sweeps actually showed. The declared infrastructure was modest. Human outposts were small, friendly, practical places, a few docking bays, a supply depot, a communications array, nothing alarming. The sensor sweeps told a different story. The underground facilities were the first thing. Power readings that went far deeper than any civilian way station needed. Structural mass that exceeded what a supply depot should have. Heat signatures consistent with large machinery operating below the surface. Then the defensive placements. Subtle. Consistent with the terrain. Easy to miss if you were looking at a civilian way station and thinking about grain prices. Clear as a bell if you were looking at a military installation and thinking about sight lines. His team flagged every human outpost in the galactic record. There were 340 of them. All 340 showed discrepancies. All 340 had sensor sweep anomalies that had been flagged and corrected and cleared, in some cases for over a century. Methril looked at the map of the galaxy with 340 flag points on it, and he saw the pattern and he understood what he was seeing. Routes. Every major transit corridor in the core systems had at least 2 human outposts on it. Every major junction had 3 or 4. The outer systems, the new territories, the contested zones, the resource-rich edges of explored space, were threaded with human waypoints like stitching in cloth. It was not a trade network. It was a patrol grid. It covered the entire explored galaxy. It had been in place, built piece by piece over 2 centuries, and nobody had seen it because they had been looking at the labels and not at the map. He sent for the council's strategic planning chief, and when that person arrived, he showed her the map, and she stood looking at it for a very long time without speaking. "They're everywhere," she said. Yes, they're in every transit corridor, every major junction. Yes, if she stopped. Yes, Methril said. She looked at him. How long? Based on the construction timelines we can reconstruct, about 190 years. They've been building this for 190 years, she sat down. And we never, no. Not once, the flags were always cleared, he said. The corrections were always timely and technically accurate, and completely reasonable. We were not looking for a pattern. We had no reason to look for a pattern. They were the Celavi, they brought food. She sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the map. What do they want? She said. Methril thought about the invitation that had been sent to the Council from Earth. Formal. Correct. Signed by a Secretary General and a name he now knew in a different context. They want a meeting, he said. They've wanted one for a long time, apparently. We kept putting it off. Because they weren't important. Because we thought they weren't important, he said. Which is not the same thing. She looked at the map again, 340 points. Every corridor. Every junction. 2 centuries of patient, invisible work. Are they a threat? She said. Methril thought about the pale horse absorbing a full broadside and not flinching. He thought about 18 ships, lighting up a perimeter without a single weapons port opening. He thought about a war that had been about to start and had instead ended with signatures, and about the particular kind of pressure that had made 2 sides do something they had refused to do for 300 years. I don't know, he said. But I don't think we're in a position to find out. He paused. I think we should go to the meeting. Zethkal received the council briefing on the shuttle back to headquarters. He read it from beginning to end. Then he read it again. He sat with it for a long time, looking out the viewport at the transit lane, at the stars moving past, at the completely ordinary-looking ships sharing the lane with them. A Keth freighter, a Solhari passenger liner. 2 ships he now looked at differently, checking their registry. One of them was human, ISV Morning Field registered to a trading company, cargo manifest, machine parts, seed stock, dried goods. He watched it for a long time. It moved at the same polite speed the pale horse had moved at, running lights blinking on their standard cycle. Scuffed hull, modest, unremarkable. He thought about what was probably underneath that hull. He thought about what was probably 40 meters below the surface of every human trading post he had ever visited, and he had visited several over 11 years. And he had never noticed. And they had fed him things and asked about his family, and he had eaten and answered, and walked away and filed his report, and moved on to the next assignment. The morning field moved at its polite speed, and did not do anything alarming. He watched it until it turned off at the junction toward the outer systems. He pulled out his meeting request, and filed his attendance confirmation for the Earth Summit. Then he sat back and looked at the stars, and thought about a card game and a corridor that was cleaner than it needed to be. And a woman who had spoken 7 languages without ever mentioning it. He thought about prepared. He thought about what that word actually held in it. 200 years of holding a hand without showing it. 200 years of being present everywhere. In every corridor, at every junction. Carrying things, delivering things, smiling and asking about families, and being useful and quiet, and not worth thinking about very much. 200 years of waiting for the moment when showing the hand was necessary. The moment had come. The galaxy had looked. And now it knew. The galaxy knew, and the meeting was tomorrow. Earth was blue. Zethkal had seen images, every diplomat had. It was in the standard council briefing on human territories. One image, the planet from orbit, included mostly because it was distinctive enough to be useful for identification. Blue oceans, white cloud cover, green and brown land masses, a habitable world, medium class, nothing exceptional. The images had not done it justice. He stood at the viewport as the shuttle made its approach and looked at the planet and tried to find a word for what it looked like and couldn't. Alive, maybe. More alive than a word could hold. Cloud edge patterns moved while he watched. The light off the ocean surface shifted. It looked like something that was breathing. The council delegation was 23 people. Every major species had sent a representative. The Keth had sent Admiral Dracus, which surprised some people and did not surprise Zethkal. Dracus was the kind of man who, when he realized he had made an error in judgment, corrected toward the truth as fast as he could get there. He wanted to understand what he was dealing with. He was here to understand it. The Solhari delegate had spent most of the transit in her cabin. The Vorith had sent Zethkal, at his own request, which had been approved with a speed that suggested his superiors were relieved to send someone who had actually met humans before. Even if only 4 of them. Even if his interactions with those 4 had clearly not told him what he should have known. The meeting facility was called Geneva. It was a city on a continent called Europe, on the northern hemisphere, at the edge of a mountain range. Zethkal had read about it on the way down. Geneva was the traditional place for important talks on Earth. It had been used for centuries. There was something in that. The humans keeping a place specifically for difficult conversations, returning to it, generation after generation, the way you return to the same room when you need to say something hard. The building they were taken to was old by human standards. Stone, high ceilings, tall windows overlooking a lake. The delegation was shown to a long room with a long table, water pitchers, coffee, small plates of food, of course. Zethkal sat down and poured himself a coffee without being asked, and Dracus looked at him. And Zethkal said, "When in Rome," which was a human phrase he had picked up somewhere, and which Dracus did not understand, and which Zethkal explained as, "Follow the local practice." Dracus considered this and poured himself a coffee too. The human delegation came in. Secretary General Hale led them. A tall man, older, with gray at his temples, and the careful posture of someone who had held authority for long enough that it had become part of how he stood. Behind him, a group of perhaps 15 people in various configurations of formal and practical dress. At the end of the line, Vasquez, still the same dark uniform, hair pulled back, brown eyes doing their quiet work. She found Zethkal's eye, gave him a small nod. He returned it. Hale took his seat at the head of the table. He looked at the council delegation. He did not perform warmth, not exactly. He was not cold. He was simply present, in the same solid way that Vasquez was present, taking in the room, ready to work. "Thank you for coming," he said in standard galactic, which was accent-free. Of course, the first hour was formalities. Hale worked through them without cutting corners. He acknowledged the council's seniority in galactic affairs. He referenced the history of human membership. He expressed appreciation for the emergency mediation window in the Reach. He was correct in every particular. Then he said, "We'd like to talk about what comes next." He placed a document on the table. It was replicated in front of each delegation member, a thin physical printout as well as a display file. "These are the proposed terms of a new framework agreement between Earth and the Galactic Council," Hale said. "They are complete as written. They are not an opening offer. They are the terms we are proposing." Zethkal read them. They were not complicated. There were 7 points. Point 1. Humanity would maintain its patrol routes, the 340 outposts, the corridor coverage, the perimeter capability, and would operate them in formal recognition as a council-affiliated security force. No longer hidden, no longer filed as trading posts, called what they were. Point 2. No war between any two council member species would be permitted to begin within any transit corridor covered by Earth's patrol routes without Earth's acknowledgement. Not prohibition, acknowledgement. Earth was not asking to approve wars. It was asking to be told about them first. Point 3. The 3 species, the Orathi, the Selen, the Drev, were to be discussed. Zethkal stopped on point 3. He looked up. He looked at Vasquez. She was watching the table. Her expression was the same as always. But there was something underneath it. Something that was not quite readable. Something that was not the steady professional calm. He had been watching her face long enough now to see the difference. He looked back at point 3 and read it again. Formal council recognition of continued Orathi, Selen, and Drev cultural and genetic continuity. To be detailed in accompanying document. He put the paper down. "Secretary General," he said. Hale looked at him. Point 3, Zethkal said. "What does cultural and genetic continuity mean?" Hale looked at Vasquez. She looked at Zethkal. "When the Orathi situation became clear," she said, 211 years ago, "we were new to the galaxy. We had one diplomatic vessel. We had no leverage and no allies and no realistic ability to intervene in what was happening." She paused. "What we could do was ask questions, learn names, find the people who were being displaced before they were fully displaced." Another pause. "Offer them somewhere to go." The room was quiet. "Over the following decades," Vasquez said, "we did the same for the Selen. And what remained of the Drev?" She looked at the table. "We have approximately 40,000 Orathi living on 3 Earth colonial stations. About 12,000 Selen. The Drev community is smaller, around 4,000, but they have maintained their cultural archives in full." Dracus, across the table, had gone very still. The Keth Empire had absorbed the Orathi, had absorbed them so completely that the galaxy considered the Orathi extinct. A historical entry. A cautionary tale, or not even that. Just a fact, old and settled, the way geological facts were settled. 40,000 of them were living on human stations. They had been living there for decades. Possibly longer. Dracus, his voice was completely controlled. "No," Vasquez said. "For decades, you said nothing." "We said nothing," she agreed. "Why?" he said. She looked at him directly. "Because the moment we said something, they were a diplomatic issue. They were leverage, or a grievance, or a claim. People with power in the galaxy would start having opinions about them. She paused. We wanted them to be safe first. We wanted them to be established, housed, stable, before they became a conversation. She looked at the table. They're ready to be a conversation now. Dracus sat with that for a long moment. He picked up the document. He read it again slowly. Point 4. Access and technology exchange to be negotiated on a case-by-case basis. Humanity was not offering its full capabilities to the Council wholesale. It was offering to sit at the table and talk about them. Point 5. The 3 council seats held by humanity were to be reclassified to full voting status, with Security Council participation. Point 6. A joint galactic stability framework, with humanity and the Council as co-architects, to replace the current arrangement where the larger powers effectively set the terms for everyone else, including the smaller species that no one much thought about, who showed up at council meetings with limited votes and brought food and asked about your family. Point 7 was short. These terms are offered in good faith. They are the terms we wanted to discuss at the meeting we have been trying to arrange for 40 years. We hope this framework represents the beginning of a productive working relationship. We would very much like to stop hiding things. It is frankly a great deal of work. Zethkal read Point 7 twice. Despite everything, despite the weight of the last week sitting in the room with him, despite 200 years of quiet deception being laid out on a table in a building by a lake in a mountain city on a blue planet, despite all of it, he felt something that was not quite a laugh but was in that direction. A great deal of work. He looked at Vasquez. She was looking at the document, but the corner of her mouth was doing something. The negotiations took 2 weeks. Not over the major points. Those held as Hale had said they would. The framework language, the specific definitions, the protocols for the patrol route transition, the formal recognition process for the Orathi and Selene and Drev communities. Those took time to work through correctly. The council delegation had questions. Hale's team answered them. Questions were answered with data, with documentation, with the kind of detail that had clearly been prepared long in advance. Very long in advance. Dracus spent 3 hours with the Keth military history section of the discussion and came out of it looking the way a man looks when something he has been angry about has quietly become something he understands. Not forgiven, understood. He requested a separate session to discuss Orathi community representation. That session ran 6 hours. He came out of it looking different. The Solhari delegate stopped spending evenings in her cabin. On the 9th day, Zethkal took a break from the sessions and walked along the lake. The day was cold and clear. The mountains were white at the top. The water was very still. Vasquez found him there around midday. She was not in the formal sessions. She had attended the first 2 days and then stepped back. Her piece said. She was walking with her hands in her jacket pockets, looking at the water. They walked for a while without talking, which Zethkal had come to understand was a thing humans were comfortable with. I want to ask you something, he said. Go ahead. The pale horse, he said. In the reach. When the Keth fired on you, yes, you knew they would. I thought they might, she said. The Keth default to force when they're uncertain. It was the most likely outcome, and you put yourself in that position on purpose. She looked at the water. We needed a moment that was unambiguous, she said. Something that the council would have to respond to. That both fleets would have to respond to. The talks had been stalling. The meeting kept getting rescheduled. She paused. We needed everyone looking at the same thing at the same time. You used your ship as a demonstration, he said. I used my ship as an argument, she said. There's a difference. He thought about that. The delivery, he said. The blankets. The medical supplies. Was that real? Of course it was real, she said, and she sounded slightly offended, which was the most unguarded he had seen her. The colony needed supplies. We had a contract. A pause. We do actually run trade routes. We actually deliver things. The patrol function and the cargo function run together. They always have. He looked at her. Because if we only patrolled, she said, we would have been noticed eventually. But if we also did the actual work, the carrying, the delivering, the being useful, then we were just part of the background. Part of how the galaxy runs. She paused. Which is what we wanted to be. Not hiding. Just not, announced. They stood by the lake. Ambassador, she said. Can I ask you something? Yes. When you came to the Pale Horse the first time, she said, and I told you to go back to your shuttle. Yes. Why did you come back? She looked at him sideways. Not accusatory, genuinely curious. After the reach. To ask questions. Then the request to attend the summit. You pushed for it. Why? He thought about it. He thought about the clean corridor and the coffee. And the word prepared. And the way she had looked at him over the cup, with an expression he still couldn't entirely read. Because I made a mistake, he said. I had 11 years of practice and I missed what was in front of me completely. I want to understand why. She nodded. And, she said. He looked at the mountains. And, he said, because you warned me, when you didn't have to. You held the door open and waited for me to walk through it. He paused. That told me something about what you were doing. About what kind of presence you intended to be. She was quiet for a moment. What did it tell you? She said. That you were not trying to win, he said. That you were trying to change something. That's a different project. She looked at the water. Yes, she said. It is. The framework was signed on the 14th day. All 23 council delegates signed. The Secretary General signed. Vasquez signed as a secondary witness, in her capacity as Director of the Earth Strategic Development Office, a title that had now been formally entered into the galactic diplomatic record, 211 years after the office was created. The news went out across the galaxy on every channel simultaneously. The reactions varied. Some council species panicked, which was predictable. Some expressed outrage at being deceived, which was understandable. Some smaller species, the ones with limited seats and limited votes, and a long history of being managed by larger powers, received the news quietly and said very little publicly, which Zethkal thought was worth paying attention to. He had a feeling that many of them had known something was different about the humans, had felt it, in the way that smaller things feel the presence of a larger thing, without being able to name it, and had perhaps been quietly, cautiously glad of it. The Orathi community statement was released the same day as the signing. 40,000 people, living on stations they had built over decades with human assistance, speaking their own language, practicing their own traditions. The statement said they were ready to engage with the Galactic Council, on terms of their choosing, in their own time, with full legal standing under the new framework. The Selene statement came 3 days later. The Drev statement came a week after that. The galaxy had not expected any of them. It did not quite know what to do with them. It was going to have to figure it out, which was, Zethkal supposed, the point. On his last night on Earth, Zethkal sat in the wardroom of the Pale Horse. The ship had been brought down to the Geneva airfield for the final sessions. It sat on the tarmac looking exactly as it always had, battered gray hull, faded white horse on the side, running lights blinking steadily. The coffee maker was running. Tell me something, he said. Vasquez sat across from him with her hands around her cup. Ask, she said. When did you know you had won? She looked at the table. A long pause, the same pause she had the first time, the one that meant she was deciding how much of the answer to give. We never thought of it as winning, she said. Then what? Not losing, she said. There's a difference. Winning means the other side loses something. That's not what we were trying to do. She looked at her cup. We watched 3 species get dismantled or absorbed or managed, and we understood that the galaxy had a pattern. And we understood that the pattern would eventually reach us, because that's what patterns do. She paused. So we changed the conditions. We didn't try to beat the pattern. We tried to make the pattern stop working. Zethkal thought about that. The 340 outposts, he said. The patrol routes, the ships, were not primarily weapons, she said. They were presence. Presence means you're there when things happen. You can't be managed away quietly when everyone can see you. You can't be absorbed when you're woven into the infrastructure everyone depends on. She paused. We were trying to become too useful to lose, too present to ignore, too careful to provoke. And then, when something had to be said, she gestured a small open-handed motion. The Pale Horse, he said. The Pale Horse, she agreed. He looked at the coffee cup, at the old walls of the wardroom, at the shelf with the framed photograph and the worn book and the small clay figure he still hadn't identified. What is that? He said, nodding at the figure. She looked at it. Her expression changed just slightly. Something softened in it. A horse, she said. Someone made it a long time ago. An Arathi girl, actually. She was 12 when she came aboard. She paused. She's 47 now. Runs the cultural archive on Station 3. He looked at the figure. Small, clay. A horse, running, roughly shaped by the hands of a child. A 12-year-old Orathi girl on a ship that the galaxy thought was carrying blankets. He sat with that for a moment. A great deal of work, he said. She smiled. A real smile, the first full one he had seen. It changed her face completely. Yes, she said. It was. Outside, the lights of Geneva reflected off the lake. The mountains were dark against a clear sky. The Pale Horse sat on the tarmac with its running lights blinking in their steady, patient rhythm. Tomorrow the delegation would return to council headquarters, and the work of implementing the framework would begin. It would be slow work. It would require patience and precision, and the willingness to sit in rooms for a long time and say difficult things carefully. Humanity, Zethkal thought, was probably good at that. He had been given 11 years to figure it out, and the honest answer was that he had not. He had looked at 4 traders and a card game and a clean corridor and taken all of it at face value, because the galaxy had told him what humans were, and the galaxy had been completely, thoroughly wrong. The galaxy had called them the unarmed. The galaxy had called them the gentle ones. And they were, in a sense. He believed that, sitting in the wardroom in the coffee smell. He believed Vasquez when she said winning was not the goal. He believed the 47-year-old Arathi woman who ran the cultural archive, and the Selene statement, and the Drev who had kept their records whole. They were gentle. They were also the most precisely, patiently, completely armed thing in the galaxy. Both things were true at the same time. He looked at the small clay horse on the shelf. He looked at Vasquez. "I want to keep learning," he said. "About all of this, I want to understand how you did it and why and what comes next." She looked at him for a moment. "Then come back," she said simply. He nodded. Outside, the pale horse's running lights blinked, steady, unhurried, ordinary, as they had always appeared to be, as, in the most important sense, they actually were. The galaxy had taken 2 centuries to look up from its assumptions and see what was there. It had looked up now, and what it found, sitting patient in every corridor, every junction, every trade lane and contested zone and unremarkable way station in the known galaxy, was not a threat, was not an enemy, was not a conqueror with a hidden sword, was just a people who had decided, a very long time ago, that they were not going to be what happened to the Arathi, and had done something about it, quietly, for 200 years, until the day they didn't have to be quiet anymore.